All right, welcome everybody to this week's Rising Tide Foundation lecture, where we are going to be introduced to an aspect of literature, and especially the figure of Alexandre Dumas, through a tale that he told in the 19th century of the Count of Monte Cristo that I think everybody here has either read the book or at the very least seen one of a number of movie renditions of this. I think everyone's familiar with the gist of the story, but there's a dimension of it that I don't think any of us have considered, but that Marty Sieff has been chewing around for a long, long time and is going to share with us today. And if there's still time after his main presentation is done, like always, we're going to open up for a little bit of a Q&A, a little bit of a dialogue. But Marty, I mean, it needs no introduction. Everyone, I think, is quite familiar with you. Your podcast also, if people are not subscribed to Marty's podcast that he does on a regular basis with Pele Neroth Taylor, then do that ASAP. There's actually going to be a link in the description box to access Marty's books as well as the podcast. Marty, thank you so much for doing this, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot. So it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Matt. Well, for those of you who saw the blurb, the key point is in the blurb. This is a story from 180 years ago, very famous novel. And yet it's a 21st century novel. What's the story? An innocent young man, 21 years old, is about to marry his childhood sweetheart. When he is arrested, he has been denounced by informers as a traitor to the state. He doesn't know this has happened. He doesn't know who the informers are. He doesn't know what the charge against him is. There is no charge against him. He is simply made to vanish. He vanishes without trace. Efforts by his closest friends and his own father to find out what happened to him meet a brick wall. Instead, his closest friends and his are reduced to starvation. His father dies of hunger, a broken man, and the mystery continues. He has disappeared. There is a deep state at work, a totally ruthless and efficient deep state. But nobody knows it's there because this is a great Western democracy, the exemplar of freedom and liberty, a shining example for the whole world. There is a parliament which meets and debates openly. There is a free press. There is an independent judiciary, and it is. But none of these things matter. Something else is going on. What is going on? And the state is not, a society are not what they appear to be. You are in a world where the honest and the honorable are systematically destroyed if they make the mistake of revealing or trying to live by their honor and honesty. Where child molesters and murderers run the police force and rise to the level of attorney general and run the highest positions of the state with impunity for decades. You live in a world of insider trading where the wealthiest billionaires gather unimaginable wealth, where the news, which you think is so free, is actually routinely manipulated with outrageous lies in order to make untold billions of dollars or francs or pounds or livres on the stock market with impunity. And everyone knows this is going on. Who can bring justice? Can anyone be called to account in a society like this? And who can do it? Because you also have in the society individuals of unimaginable wealth who own their own islands, who take drugs routinely, who have teenage mistresses, who they bought from slave traders, who they openly flaunt at in society meetings. Is this all starting to sound a little familiar to you? And who also have the closest ties with organized crime, which does their bidding at will on a transnational basis with impunity towards the law. And all of this, as I know you have already worked out, Jerry, I see it in your face, all of the things are carried out by the hero. The hero It is the hero who has a teenage slave girl mistress who was already taught to be a sex slave as a teenager in the harems of Constantinople. It is the hero who has an island where he openly carries out, and this is explicitly shown in the book. There is no secret or shame about it in the book. Where he repeatedly through the book extols the benefits of hashish and what we would call marijuana and smoking opium pipes and other forms of drugs in higher consciousness. And this is the hero who is the only hope for bringing justice to a society such as this. Wow. No wonder no one can take the Count of Monte Cristo at face value. And yet they have to. Because Alexandre Dumas, I will maintain here, is a far more important and wiser and more accurate figure as a critic of society and as an understander of how human nature and the historical process works than Tolstoy. Dostoevsky, of course, is in a class of his own. That's a different story. But Tolstoy purports to tell you how history happens, how history is made by completely anonymous forces, and that even great figures, supposedly Napoleon, are jokes. They have no power at all. But in the Count of Monte Cristo, writing 40 years earlier, no, 25 years earlier, Tolstoy, of course, writes into the 20th century, but War and Peace is written in the 1860s. This book is written in the 1840s. The electric telegraph has been invented, but has yet to be implemented. And yet, Dumas foresees it. He talks about a society where communication, for the first time in human history ever, because of the wooden telegraph system in France, information can be passed across Europe faster than a galloping horse can, the fastest galloping horse can carry it. But the system, of course, is controlled by the state. But the state, being socialist, pays its staff members tiny amounts of money. Therefore, those members are can be bribed. The Count of Monte Cristo describes a society where the dollar is king, where gold is king, where most of all diamonds of unimaginable beauty and size in exquisite settings are king. A society where everyone can be bought and is bought. A society where wealth has its own gravitational pull. You do not have to exert yourself to be above the law if you have $100 million, let alone $1 billion or $5. You do not have to put yourself above the law. The fact that you are known to have that amount of wealth will make everyone do your bidding effortlessly in the desperate hope that you may drop some tiny spit of your own unimaginable wealth on them, and there are no higher spiritual values. And you have a hero who is an anti-hero, who does not uphold the state or seek to restore the state. He is not a philosopher king. He is a philosopher, but he is a philosopher of nihilism. He is a philosopher of ego. And what brought him to this? Because he was destroyed mercilessly for no reason at all by petty envies at one extreme and by the entire manipulative power of the most powerful state in the world, or one of the two most powerful states in the world, acting blindly and irresponsibly at the hands of tiny dwarfs who are pygmies operating within it. This is not a dystopia written by H.G. Wells. It is not a dystopia written by a humane prophet like Jules Verne or George Orwell. This is 1984, written after the fact, as fact, by a man who observed it, Alexandre Dumas. And nobody at the time realized what he was doing and what he had done. As we shall see, it is perfectly possible, and you can argue very well, Dumas himself did not realize the scale of his achievement or what he had done. Because the Count of Monte Cristo, like the many adaptations that have been made of it since, is like the Bible. It is like a Rorschach test. You can read it in different ways. There are endless interpretations to it. I first read it as a 13 and 14-year-old boy. And I was enthralled by it. I had no deep, I was just looking for a good, thrilling yarn. And it was approved about my school that we should read such things. And unlike most of my friends, I waded through all of it. It is not quite the size of Tolstoy's War and Peace. I thought it was even longer. Actually, it's a bit shorter. Tolstoy's War and Peace is about 550,000 to 600,000 words. This is minor by comparison. This is a mere 311,000 words in the English translation, and it runs to between 1,100 to 1,600 close print pages, each of which would contain 3 times the amount of text you would find in an airport paperback. So there is a lot of reading there. And it has not been suppressed by our entertainment industry, nor has it been pushed by it. But it is a ripping yarn. It fascinates people. So there have been more than 200 movie adaptations and more than 100 television adaptations around the world. The television adaptations have been in Japanese, in Korean, in Mexico, and nations across the Middle East and across Africa. It is a huge favorite in Russia, for understandable reasons. And there are 3 versions of it which have been made in the last 60 years, 2 of them within the last 15 to 20 years, which are my personal favorites, which I will start now before I exhaust you all. If the book is too much for you, there are 3 great adaptations. The best by far, which I have asked Matt to put a link in the chat box, is you can all read it instantly for free in English. It's amazing. It was done by the British Broadcasting Corporation in the 1960s, a time before the deep state got round to taking television too seriously. And the most amazing creative work was done freely in British television, much more than in American television. And it got past all the layers of bureaucrats and censors because they didn't realize what it was or what it could be. And it stars an extraordinary English actor who last died far too young, and it was just from a heart attack. He liked to party, and he liked to live hard, called Alan Bedell. He died in 1982. The series was made in 1964, and he is simply the best Count of Monte Cristo ever. Nobody comes close. He is as perfect in the role as Joan Hickson is as Miss Marple, and as David Suchet is as Poirot. He is that good. He's pitch perfect. And there are 2 other versions which have been made since, which could be easy to despise because they take much more liberties with the text and elements of the plot, but are also in the different ways also first class and made with heart and feeling and integrity. The first is in around 2002, and it's a movie version, a Hollywood movie version, which ought to be dreck, as all the other Hollywood movie versions were, embarrassing shit. But this is superb. And it has 2 actors who both had long and eminent careers. Like I'm going to say are still very much around, but are of extraordinary talent. The Count, the first one, the 202 one, is played by the Count is played by Jim Caviezel, a most interesting man, because Jim Caviezel is one of those actors who Hollywood hates. He's a conservative. He stands up against the liberal permissive consensus. He's a devout practicing Catholic. He and his wife have quite a number of kids, I think 6 or 8, I forget how many. I stand to be corrected if anyone would bother checking it up on Wikipedia while I maintain eye contact with you. And he has actually made one absolute stunning movie that will maybe last for all time, because he plays Jesus in Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. And Gibson told him when they made the movie, you realize this movie will make you unemployable in Hollywood and you will never work again. And it was for all the obvious reasons. And he took the role anyway, right? Caviezel, of course, was one of these wonderful people blessed with extraordinary resilience, which incidentally, Matt and Cynthia obviously have, and I think all of you in the audience, bless you, have, because otherwise you wouldn't be there. And I must have some too, because I wouldn't still be here with you now either. Resilience is one of the most underestimated and crucial human qualities. George Patton said, Patton said it was arguably the most important. Patton said the mark of a man is not how high he rises, but how high he rises after he has been knocked to the bottom. The Count of Monte Cristo as a hero or anti-hero, of course, completely fulfills that definition. And as we shall see a little later, Alexandre Dumas, Père, Dumas Sr., who created him, does too. He does too. The third version is, as we running, still being repeated. It's very popular on liberal PBS television in America. The Count of Monte Cristo, again, is so resilient that he attracts the imagination and the attention of people from diverse cultures around the world. And again, he is a Rorschach test. Whatever is in him, you can find in him from different cultures. He speaks to different people. He speaks to different cultures. He speaks to different historical experiences. I have experiences in my own life that I adapt to the Count of Monte Cristo. And more than that, before we go any further, and I'm going to be, I'll try and finish this within an hour to have enough time for questions for an hour to an hour and a half or so afterwards. So I'm going to be dropping Easter eggs through this. Hopefully intriguing points, but if they strike you, take a note on them so you can follow up on me if we have time afterwards. And it's that first is this. I worked for a real life Count of Monte Cristo, and he really was a European count. Count Arnaud de Bourgrave, editor-in-chief of the Washington Times, who hired me in sight unseen virtually in 1986, and who remained one of my closest friends for the next 29 years. But Arnaud actually fitted the profile of the Count of Monte Cristo perfectly. And as we shall see, there's no surprise for this, because in Dumas, the more outrageous and extraordinary and exceptional and bizarre and ludicrous characters appear to be, you will find they actually came from the actual historical record and his own personal experience, which is one of the reasons theoretical intellectuals in the ivory towers of universities, and especially in departments of comparative English literature, loathe Dumas so much and do not take him seriously as a serious writer. Of course, the other reason is he's French. Simple as that. Simple as that, right? But what were the parallels between the Count of Monte Cristo, as Dumas creates them, and my old friend? A European aristocrat, a count, from a very dubious and mysterious background. He knows everything that goes on in organized crime around the world. The darkest people of the deep states, not just in America, but in France, in Britain, in Germany, in Israel, in Arabia, revere him as their friends. He spends all his time going around Arab nations in the Middle East, where he is always at home and welcomed as a guest, in Saudi Arabia, in the United Arab Emirates, in gangster militarist states like Pakistan, where he is on splendid drinking terms with the ruling generals of the day. He is a man in some respects above morality. Nothing shocks him. He has seen everything. He has been in every war. Arnaud de Bourgrave commanded a Higgins boat as a 16-year-old boy in the British Royal Marines at D-Day in 1944 to help the liberation of Europe from Nazi tyranny. 8 years later, he was the last Western reporter to be evacuated from Dien Bien Phu before the Viet Minh overran the place to end the First Indochina War. 25 years after that, when I was a senior executive editor at United Press International, we sent Arnaud, it was the year 2000, in fact. He was already at 74 years old. We sent him to Afghanistan right before America invaded Afghanistan. He thought he could get an exclusive interview with Osama bin Laden. He did not. He felt that at 74 he was slowing down and he was a failure. He had to settle for getting an exclusive interview with Sheikh Omar, the head of the Taliban. And again, he scooped the world, right? In 1979, he went for dinner with his best friend to the Hotel Georges V in Paris. Where else would the Count of Monte Cristo dine? And his best friend was the head of SDECE, the French External Intelligence Service, arguably at that time the finest global intelligence network in the world. And he and Arno had been each other's closest friends for 60 years at that point. I mean, you cannot make this kind of stuff up. You simply cannot. That's the wonderful thing about truth. And that's the reason why Arno was despised by the liberal intellectuals and the Soros internationalists, who, of course, always underestimated him too, just as Dumas was as well. So Arno was still paid by Newsweek at this dinner. He was shortly to be fired from Newsweek under terms, which would again perfectly fit what the life of the Count of Monte Cristo. He asked his lifelong best friend, who he introduced me to on many occasions too, another Alexander, in fact. Trying to remember what his second name was. The French aristocrat who headed the French domestic intelligence, external intelligence service for many years. I can look it up too, but Arno asked his friend, is there anything we in Newsweek are missing in the world? What is going to happen next? And his friend said to him, Arno, this is by now they finished the exquisite meal, which cost at least $1,000, and Newsweek had to pay for it. Again, as with the Count of Monte Cristo, money was meaningless for Arno, right? And Arno says to ask this fellow, "What should we look at in the world?" And the head of French intelligence, like the Delphic oracle, is supposed to issues the following remark: "Afghanistan looks interesting right now." That's all he said. 1979. Afghanistan looks interesting right now, right? This is 21 years before Arno went to interview Sheikh Omar. On the basis of that, Arno, again on Newsweek's budget, which drove the money men and the bean counters at Newsweek crazy, books himself a first-class ticket, three-quarters of the way round, halfway around the world. I've done that route all too often myself, or variations of it, to Kabul, is totally jet-lagged. He's already a man in his 50s at that point, of course, 53. Goes straight to bed in his hotel. Of course, the best that there is in Kabul. Not that that's saying much. And as he loved to tell the story endlessly afterwards, but like all the most outrageous Arno stories, many of which I was able to fact-check in great detail, it was true. And I woke up in the morning to the sound of Soviet T-55 heavy tanks rumbling through the streets of Kabul. Brezhnev had sent the Red Army in, and Arno was the only Western correspondent there before the Soviets shot the borders down, and once again he scooped the world. 7 years later, when I started working for him, he put me on a subject that was so ridiculous. It had the whole newsroom of the Washington Times. I remember this was an anti-communist, conservative, Republican, Soviet-hating newsroom, and they thought this was ridiculous. He put me on the subject of the coming collapse of the Soviet Union and how Ukraine and Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania are all going to become independent nations within the next 10 years. Now, I didn't laugh at him because my girlfriend, who I was about to marry, was Ukrainian American. And I knew all of her family who did not have the wisdom to come to America, who stayed in Ukraine, were annihilated by Stalin long before the Nazis ever got there. Right? An extended family of 60 people gone just like that, because the whole 10 million people did die there. And you could argue that Stalin wasn't singling out the Ukrainians because he murdered Russians and Kazakhs and Uzbeks and Jews and Latvians and Estonians. He murdered everybody. He was totally impartial. Stalin was not a racist. He was a mass murderer on a scale at least as great as Adolf Hitler, arguably more so. But he was not a racist. He just slaughtered in principle. But for those personal reasons, I thought when everyone else, Arno, was talking absolute nonsense, and I traveled extensively in the Soviet Union myself by that point, I knew he wasn't talking nonsense. Is this a Count of Monte Cristo character, or is it not? He even looked like the Count of Monte Cristo. He was quite small. Count of Monte Cristo was bigger. But they were both impeccably dressed always. They always dined in the most impeccable circumstances. He could hold his drink. You could not hold a senior editorial position with Arno de Borgraaf unless you could successfully metabolize 2 or 3 generously sized beef eater cocktails, heavy on the gin, after lunch every day. Anyone who could not do that, or who made a fool of themselves, or who just fell asleep, or who just even slurred their words, you were not destined for editorial greatness long at the Washington Times or Insight Magazine, or shortly afterwards at United Press International, which he also reshaped for a generation, right? Arno was immensely tolerant in most ways, but on values like that, he was impeccable. But is this a Count of Monte Cristo character, or is it not? Unlike the Count of Monte Cristo, Arno found regular morality irrelevant to him, and yet he had a strong sense of human decency and generosity, as I experienced again and again, and saw again and again, as the Count of Monte Cristo does. The Count of Monte Cristo always rewards virtue and always destroys vice. But he destroys vice and villainy in a certain way. It's in keeping with his strange ways, which again reflect the confusion and contradictions we will see in Dumas himself. Because on the one hand, Dumas paints a vision of society which is extremely nihilistic and despairing. But there is still hope there. In fact, the last word in the novel is hope. And hope is centrality to it. Again and again in the Count of Monte Cristo, heroic characters are driven to the edge of suicide. And again, they are rescued from it by a divine providence. In one case, where a truly contemptible and vile character meets his just deserts, murdered by a man who he served as a galley slave with him, who was really rather like his son, and the themes of both natural and unnatural sons, who grew up to be monsters, and adopted sons who owe nothing to their fathers but turn out to be the most admirable of human beings. These are other recurrent obsessive themes of Dumas in the novel. Partly because Dumas, I think, revered his own father, but his father, who was a truly heroic and extraordinarily bizarre figure too, as we shall see, dies when Dumas is only 4 years old. Now, I'm deliberately dividing this presentation into two parts, and we'll be going, the chronological part will come later. First, I'm giving you the paradoxes and fascination and importance of the novel. Secondly, I will then go back and say, this is why it is as it is, because this is the life Dumas led. So first of all, we're going to go through the life the Count of Monte Cristo led, and then we're going to go back and see the life his creator led that led him to create the Count of Monte Cristo. Because the Count of Monte Cristo as a novel is a clash of conflicting values. And in this, it reflects the history and reality of France in the 1840s, just as we have in Canada and America today. The contradictions are so many, they are extraordinary. As I have said, we start with a hero who is more like an antichrist than a Christ figure. He is a nihilist. He has teenage mistresses. He boasts that all codes of law are irrelevant to him. He sneers at the great Western cultural and religious traditions, or at least he appears to. And yet, again and again through the novel, the role of God's role, which Monte Cristo openly recognizes and quotes throughout. He sees himself as the avenger created by God Almighty, and he sees God Almighty as having maintaining a concept of justice and righteousness and reward and punishment that human beings are not capable of enforcing for themselves, and that therefore God Almighty must intervene on their behalf. And the great sin in the Count of Monte Cristo is to deny the beneficence of an all-good, all-wise God. And when one of the most contemptible villains is dying in the book, a man who has been given every opportunity and has repaid that opportunity at every step with murder, with treachery, with torture, with hate when love was poured upon him, when he is finally being stabbed to death himself and he is moaning his own fate. Oh, no, there is no God. There was never any justice for me. I never had a chance. And the Count bends over him and says, even now, Caderousse, do you not recognize me? But you are the count. You are the great and fearsome count. You are the man who gave me so much wealth and who I tried to rob at the end. And it has cost me my life because you did not kill me, but my own adopted son killed me. I paraphrase slightly, but that's the essence of it. No, Caderousse, look beneath my mask. Who am I really? And Caderousse realizes it is the 18-year-old boy who he betrayed to life in prison, in solitary confinement in the dungeons on the very morning of his wedding day, Edmond Dante, all those decades before. And the dying words the villainous, contemptible Caderousse says is, my God, there is a God, there is a God, there is justice. And that is one of the greatest paradoxes in Dumas. Dumas portrays a society without hope, a society without morality, a society filled with hypocrisy, where the very forces that ought to embody virtue and integrity are the embodiment of the very opposite. And yet Dumas said, and where the only force for justice is someone who otherwise would be regarded as Jeffrey Epstein, as a force for evil, and rightly so. Though even with his teenage mistress, which an issue we will tackle head on soon, because it is an embarrassment to all the recent adaptations of the Count of Monte Cristo, and it's hilarious to watch the way they try to skate nervously around it. How do you stay true to the story when Dumas faces hideous facts in the face and refuses to flinch from them and refuses to pretty them up? It's like Michelangelo painting sulfurous sores caused by venereal disease on his David, or in one of his classic works of art. Even 400 years later, the greatest of sculptors to follow Michelangelo, Renoir, would never do that. But there are novelists who do it. And there are novelists who do it because they are nihilists and dark and evil and destructive. But as we shall see, Dumas is not. He appears to be, but he is not. So here is the basic story of the Count of Monte Cristo. An innocent man is disappeared by the deep state. He is sent to Guantanamo Bay, to Gitmo, or to a CIA secret prison in Romania or in Afghanistan. And every effort through the authority, through his loving friends who have not despaired of him, to find out even what has happened to him, to get him free, to get justice and lawyers on his behalf, gets nowhere. On the contrary, if you show too much of an interest in him, you are targeted and you are broken, or you mysteriously die, and you are certainly ruined for life. Is this starting to sound contemporary to any of you? Is this starting to sound familiar? Is it? Yet the France of the 1840s had more excuse to be this way than we have in the United States and Canada today. Because we are about to celebrate, if that is the appropriate word, under President Trump, the 250th anniversary of American independence. And apart from such little unfortunate embarrassments, which of course were only blips along the way, like slavery and the extension of slavery and the endless wars of aggression, and most of all, the Civil War, a suicidal nightmare brought on America by France at the time, which was then in the thralls of the Emperor Napoleon III, who Dumas loathed. And we will get to another contradiction there soon. And of course, to the British who put Napoleon III in place. This brings us to more contradictions in Dumas. Dumas loves England. He admires their wealth enormously. The English characters in the Count of Monte Cristo, the Count himself masquerades very happily as Lord Wilmore, an aristocratic English gentleman with almost as much disposable wealth as the Count of Monte Cristo himself. And of course, it's really Monte Cristo having a game, right? But he's presented as an admirable figure. Monte Cristo's enormous wealth, which he uses to topple dynasties and kingdoms and ruin people of the scale of Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, is operated for by a British bank based in Rome, significantly enough. Again, Dumas is ahead of his time. This is long before the banking scandals of the 1960s, 60s and the 1970s. Yet Rome is seen as being on the edge of civilization, but not quite but. Luigi Vampi is the most feared outlaw in Rome, a psychopathic killer, the John Dillinger of the day. Everybody fears him, except, of course, for Monsieur le Comte, except for the Count of Monte Cristo, whose life he saved and whose life he spurred. And since then, Vampa has been in Monte Cristo's debt, so Monte Cristo can call on him, on the resources of organized crime at its most powerful and vicious and impune, to kidnap whoever he wants, to assassinate whoever he wants, though he doesn't usually deign to do that. He's perfectly capable of doing it morally, but he regards it as beneath his dignity. And also, killing is too easy a form of dispatch. One of Monte Cristo's many fascinating hobbies, which never appears in any of the modern movie versions or TV versions, of course, is he likes to study different forms of execution in different nations around the world. And he draws no moral lessons from them. He does not say in France, your guillotine is so much more humane, so swifter, so morally, spiritually superior to everyone else. Nor does he say capital punishment is barbaric. He welcomes it usually. At the very worst, he is never disapproving of it. It's irrelevant to him. It's irrelevant to him. And again, he works with the British with impunity when it suits him, because he is above the law. But what is the France he is operating in? It is a France with no moral compass whatsoever. And why? I mentioned just before, in America, we are coming up to our 250th anniversary of our founding. And there are so many ways you can argue that our society is so total corrupt and beyond hope. I don't think it's quite that far, but heaven knows it's close enough. And all of us believe that, or we wouldn't be here at this seminar, would we? Of course we wouldn't be. But there is a 250 years of organic development that led to this point. And there was only one huge rupture in all that time, and it was the Civil War. But this was not the case in the France of Alexandre Dumas, of the Count of Monte Cristo. In the 1840s, only the past 50 years, now I'm well over 50 years old. I think most of you in this audience are over it. Imagine living through 8 different regimes, not through 8 different governments, through 8 different total revolutions, each of which in their own way was as sweeping as the Russian Revolution or the American Revolution. First of all, you had the French monarchy, the oldest in Europe and most powerful in Europe for 1,000 years, toppled in the terrible revolution of 1789. Then you had the chaotic, despotic, monstrous terror that killed tens of thousands in Paris alone, that slaughtered the aristocracy of France, who did not flee in time, and that set off a civil war that killed 3 million people in the early 1790s. This is government number 2. Then you have government number 3, the Directory, rather similar to the government Dumas is under 50 years later. And you could argue similar to the US government under President Trump or even under Biden today. A government that stands for nothing. A corrupt government where everything can be bought and is. A government of despair, of contempt. A government of cynicism. But a government that everybody welcomes because so many people have already died in the Civil War and the wars to preserve their wonderful revolution. And so they put up with it. Rather like the new economic policy period under Lenin and the early Stalin. But then this is followed too. The people rise up again. They've learned how to do it in the streets of Paris. And they are put down by a brilliant young tactical soldier of genius who has worked out how to slaughter hundreds or even thousands of people with 3 or 4 cannons at the same time, simply by putting chain shot and waste and bullets and shotgun pebbles instead of firing cannonballs so you can massacre lots of people at point blank range. This, of course, is the young Napoleon Bonaparte. And he takes over France. And he doesn't stop there. And he conquers Italy and Western Europe. And one of his top generals is Thomas Alexandre Dumas, who is the black child of freed slaves who rose up against their French overlords in Haiti, who believed in the revolution, who came to Paris, and is such a brilliant general at the age of 34 that he does something which is tactically virtually impossible even today. He captures the Alpine passes from a powerful military force of the Austrian Empire and opens them and makes it possible for Napoleon to conquer both Austria and the heart of Central Europe and Italy as well. And he is the father of our Alexandre Dumas. And he dies. He's not murdered, as far as I can tell. Please look it up. I stand to be corrected. But he burns himself out. He's dead of exhaustion at the age of around 44, and he leaves children after him, including the legend for his impoverished son, Alexandre. And this is the origin of our novelist. But we've had the Kingdom of France, we've had the Revolution, we've had the Directory, now we have number 4 government, Napoleon. But Napoleon is forced to abdicate in 1814, and his own generals turn on him. And the Russian army gets as far as Paris. And the British and the Prussians and the Austrians and the Russians all come from countries that have been impoverished by Napoleon in the name of freedom, equality, eternity, basically burning and raping. The rape was particularly popular with the French armies at the time, and eating everything there was to eat in those countries at the time. And so Louis XVIII is the last surviving potential, apparently credible Bourbon, is returned to power, cautious and cynical, but reactionary and fearful, not a very fat, a very unappetizing fellow, and nobody likes him or wants him. So 100 days later, Napoleon pulls off one of the greatest coups in history. He escapes from his own at Monte Cristo Island. He escapes from the island of Elba. He comes back to France, and all the people of France rise up again. He has caused them millions of dead. And these, you must despair of human stupidity and human nature. It isn't just the Russians under Stalin, or the Israelis not dumping Netanyahu, or the monster Hitler, who nobody except a handful of Christian conservatives even tried seriously to ever topple. It seems to happen in every country. The worse the psychopath, the more suffering he inflicts on the country, especially if the ideals are high-minded, the more the people love him. And we will find that this was still so true 30 years later in the time of Dumas and the time of the Count of Monte Cristo. So the French people ran up for Napoleon and put him back in power. This is regime number 5. But it only lasts 100 days before the old conservative allies, mainly the British army under Wellington and the Prussian army coming to their support under Blucher, the same advanced nations that would slaughter each other's guts out 100 years later. And for what? And they act together to save Europe in 1814 and 1850, and the lesson should have been remembered 100 years later, but of course it was not. Which is a discussion for another time, why it was not. So many horrible, disgusting reasons. But that's the look. We've just had 3 more governments of France succeeding each other in quick succession in 100 days, in less than 4 months, right? And then after that, you have for 15 years, you have the restored Louis XVIII and the successor Charles X. But then there was another coup in Paris, and the mere threat of a coup is enough to bring a more liberal French ruler, Louis Philippe, to power in 1830. And this is a totally different regime as well. And every time this happens, it's not just a change at the top. Everybody in the civil service are political favorites, and they are purged on every occasion, and there is no welfare state to cushion the blow. If you lose your government job and you are blacklisted in the very effective archives of the French government, you and your wife and your children and your grandchildren and your parents and your grandparents will starve to death, and they do, repeatedly. And this happens every time there was a change of regime. And regimes change in 1814, in 1815, again in 1815, and in 1830. What does this mean in all? It means that in 1838 to 1840, when the Count of Monte Cristo was set in Paris, France has had not just 8 governments, many more than that. It has had 8 revolutions and 8 regimes in 50 years. And what does this produce? It produces cynicism. It produces passivity. Most of all, it produces terror and fear and insecurity everywhere. Everyone has secrets that can destroy them or their loved ones. everyone. You cannot avoid it. You cannot avoid it. And this is the world of despair that the Count of Monte Cristo operates in. So, what fills the gap? Religion has been cast out and repeatedly brought back and failed to prevent the whirlwinds happening. Liberal secular revolutionary ideology has failed miserably again and again for all its wide-reaching promises. Nationalism has largely failed. As we shall see for Dumas, it does not, because there are contradictions in Dumas. So what is left? Money is left. Modern America is left. Every problem can be dissolved if you buy off the costs of it. The three men who betrayed the young Edmond Dante, and he is thrown into the Chateau d'If, the lowest dungeon in the most fearsome prison in France, the Gulag of France, right? The Dachau of France. And he is kept in solitary confinement with no contact for any other human being for the next 14 years until he escapes in an improbable way. For the next 14 years, right? Who to this fate? He was only 18 years old, and the first one guy is the purser, the financial officer and administrator on his ship, Monsieur Danglars, who is twice his age, but supposedly was Edmond's mentor and friend, but is jealous of him. And when Edmond comes out, he discovers Danglars has become one of the wealthiest human beings on earth and the wealthiest man in France. He is the biggest banker in France. He has created Citibank. He is the Rockefeller of France. No railroad can be built without his approval. No new industry can be raised up without him being given 40 to 50% of the share. This is the Baron Danglars. And the second man who betrayed him was his dear best friend from Spain, a Catalan, who loved the lovely Mercedes. The French of that era, like Bizet and Carmen, had a thing for Catalan women from around Barcelona. So they at least had excellent taste. Who could blame them? Right? But Mercedes is such a lady, and she isn't meant to be a femme fatale the way Carmen is, luring men to their doom. But the way Dumas writes her and the way the story develops at the end, she really is an idiot. She really is a dolt, though not totally. But she's presented as totally admirable, right? And the great love of her life is Edmond, and she wants no one else. But when Edmond is not there, the young soldier Fernand Mondego, who betrayed Edmond, takes her instead. But Mondego is a serial traitor. He did not just betray his best friend. He deserts from the French army and from Napoleon's cause on the eve of Waterloo and betrays the French to the British. Then, to get back in the graces of the French, he goes back into his native Spain and spies on behalf of the French before they invade Spain in 1820. So he betrays his own Spanish people. Then the second time back there, and then the third time, he becomes, with French government approval, the top French mercenary soldier and military advisor to a great Christian ruler who defies the communist dark villain of the day, who defies the Osama bin Laden of the day, who is, of course, presented as the Sultan of Turkey. And Mondego goes back and to the stronghold of Yanina in Thrace, which overlaps with modern Albania, which is actually and this is actually not in geographical Albania, it was in political Albania at the time, but it's in northern Greece. And he carries out arguably his greatest treachery of all. He betrays and murders the man who he serves and steals his wealth. So he comes back to France and he buys a title and he becomes the Comte de Morcerf, the Count of Morcerf. So we have two counts against each other here, both of them in a way fake counts, but in very different ways. We have the Count of Monte Cristo, and his arch enemy turns out to be the man who stole his girlfriend all those years ago, the Comte de Morcerf. And this is the ultimate showdown in the Count of Monte Cristo, especially in the superb 2002 American movie version with Jim Caviezel as a marvelous count and Guy Pearce as the best Mondego ever. And the British version in 1964 had a Welsh actor, a wonderful guy, alas died a few years ago, called Philip Madoc, M-A-D-O-C. who went on to play David Lloyd George in a biopic version. And to go from the Dumas arch villain to David Lloyd George is really conceptually not a big jump. And Maddox specialized in playing villains all his life. And again, he's marvelous in the role. But when we look especially at Mondego, we see more crucial themes and contradictions in Dumas. Dumas made no secret of his politics. They were, to my mind, infantile and contemptible. Let's get that out of the way straight away. The big stinking elephant, you know, they just suppose not to, you're writing about a writer you admire enormously. What's contemptible about him? He's a liberal revolutionary. His best friend is Garibaldi. He never saw a British and French inspired revolution of color. By color, I don't mean racial color, but political color. An orange revolution, a pink revolution, a black revolution, a yellow polka dotted revolution that he didn't want. This is Dumas. But at the same time, he reveres the strong man. His hero is Napoleon. And this is made explicitly clear throughout the book in the most subtle but unforgettable of ways. When I was growing up as a teenager in the 60s, having the wayward tastes I did, I liked reading modern German novels about World War II. I wanted to see how German writers at the time, who were popular in Germany, not writers like Günter Grass, who actually served in the SS, but then went on to say, oh, how wicked Hitler was, but people who kind of, as they say in England, rode with the hound, hunted with the hounds, and rode and ran with the hares, who were on both sides at the same time, who wanted to have mass readership among people who still remembered the glory days of Adolf, even if they were sensible enough not to dream of having them back since they'd actually survived them, right? And the best writer of that kind, and he's not morally totally insignificant either, he's well worth looking at because he's a subtle man, Hans Helmut Kirst, who's best remembered for the movie The Night of the Generals, which he first wrote as a novel. But you should look at the Gunnar Ash novels. Now, the Gunnar Ash novels present a cleaned up, purified Wehrmacht that never was, a Wehrmacht that didn't know the Jews were being slaughtered, that protected the odd Jew or socialist that came into the camp of the ordinary decent soldiers fighting on the Eastern Front. This was not the real Wehrmacht, not remotely. But that's the way they like to remember themselves. This was Dumas 120 years earlier, because in the Count of Monte Cristo, there is actually another paradox. There is he's not a Platonist, but in some ways he's deeply in Plato's traditions. He reveres the philosopher king concept as the only way to bring justice and stability to society at the same time, because democracy is inherently flawed and will inherently degrade into the horrific conditions that you see in France in the 1840s. And who is his philosopher king? Napoleon I, Napoleon Bonaparte himself. And yet when Napoleon III takes over, he hates Dumas and Dumas hates him, has no secret about hating him. And Dumas flees France as an exile for 15 years after Louis Napoleon seizes power and then makes himself emperor. You see where the paradoxes and the U-turns and the contradictions come about here. But in the Count of Monte Cristo, every heroic figure, without exception, is loyal to Napoleon. Every one. And all the evil villains, every one of them, have betrayed Napoleon. And the terrible justice that is done to Edmond Dantes is not done under Napoleon. It is done under the Restoration, under Louis XVIII, immediately after a foreign force has come back into France. And this is the time when even the later, imagine what the reaction would be if in Germany today they built an arch of triumph to Hitler or Guderian in Berlin. The very idea is inconceivable to the modern German people, and they don't want it. Yet the French did that in 1840. The regime which had been put in to replace Napoleon built the biggest and most impressive tomb the Western world had ever seen to house Napoleon in Paris. And they also built the Arc de Triomphe, which is breathtaking work of architecture which dwarfs anything London or Berlin had, or Rome, at that time. What is the lesson of such monumental architecture? We're still number one, and don't you forget it, baby. But it was Napoleon who made it so. And Dumas approves of this. Every character who is loyal to Napoleon or the memory of Napoleon is honorable in the book, and everyone who betrayed Napoleon or undermined him or fled to support the British is evil. And this brings us to the next fascinating point, in which, again, he is both a Platonist, I think. I stand to be corrected in the subtleties here by you, Matt, but he is certainly in the tradition of Marcus Aurelius. Because in Marcus Aurelius, while repentance is a technical possibility, and of course, those naive, idiotic Christians who haven't read Greek philosophy are naive enough to believe in it. But Marcus Aurelius basically says, you are what you are, whether it's good or bad or complex. The soul is that way and it does not change. And this is Dumas' interpretation of human nature. And it is not uncommon. You find subtle, the concept of repentance is there in Milton. It is there in earlier great European authors. It is there in later European tradition, most certainly, obviously. But in the time of the great Victorian classics, it is not really there. Even in Tolstoy, Pierre Bezukhov becomes purified by his sufferings and his mistakes and his stupidities and his naivety and his idealism. But he does not fundamentally change because Pierre has always been a good guy. He's been a naive idiot, too naive for his own good, always making a drunken ass of himself. The great girlfriend of my youth during our university years together at Oxford would turn to me when we were watching Anthony Hopkins' superb portrayal of Pierre in when the BBC actually produced wonderful shows in those days before corruption had totally eroded it and political correctness. And she said, Marty, you are Pierre. You are Pierre, which is, of course, half a wonderful flattery. But the other half of it, which of course I was too young to realize at the time, was it's also terrifying, absolutely terrifying when you see what the poor schnook put himself through. And God, the universe, and fate were more merciful to me. But I ended up in enough ridiculous situations across Eurasia to come to realize the truth of those words. But there is no evolution at all in Dumas' characters, except one, and it's a crucially important one. The good, purified by their suffering, become even better and greater figures with greater souls than they ever wanted to be or dreamed of imagining themselves to be. The already good are elevated through suffering, but the already wicked are bad beyond all hope. And not quite all hope, because all hope is still given to them and they still repeatedly spurn it. But like Caderousse, but every time they spurn hope, the scale of their crimes and monstrosities becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, spoiler alert here, I'm going to be giving away a lot of plot details from the Count of Monte Cristo. But first of all, I'd assume you either are so well read you know them anyway, or the book is so complicated that if you start trying to read the book, or even you need software even to track the plot twists in the television and movie versions, because Dumas crams in so many subplots. I mean, Dumas is not really a writer of novels. He's a writer of soap operas that go on forever. And it made him a fortune. It made him a fortune. But one looks at the character of Fernand Mondego. Mondego commits his first crime, betraying his best friend to either death or a lifetime of unimaginable suffering at the bottom of the worst prison in France, infinitely worse than the Bastille ever was. Now, you might say that's bad enough, right? But he's doing it for jealousy and for love. They are at least recognizable human motives. What does he go on to do? First of all, he betrays his country and the great Emperor Napoleon, who for Dumas is the embodiment of all civic virtue, the philosopher king. He betrays him to the English. What could be the traditional enemy? What could be more contemptible? And then, being Spanish, he goes back to Spain and he betrays the Spanish people to French overlordship, to French occupation and conquest again, after everything that had happened before. And even that is not enough. He then, with his gift for lies, manages still to rise to the top of the state. Does this sound unfamiliar in modern Canada and the United States? The more contemptible your crimes, the more contemptible your associations, the more you turn on, you make contemptible lies of your most solemn loyalties and promises and pledges and policies, the higher you rise. And he murders the man who he is sworn to protect, who has made him a wealthy man, who regards him as his best friend, a Christian ruler in the Muslim Empire. He murders him with his own hands, and then he sells Ali Pasha's widow, his favorite harem wife, and his young child, 8-year-old daughter, into slavery. Whereas the girl later testifies to the Count of Monte Cristo, because again, she becomes his mistress when she's only 16 or 17 years old, but she's not a virgin. She's been deflowered 1,000 times by this point, and Dumas makes it clear to his readers, who are all familiar with what happened in the seraglios, in the harems of Constantinople, what this meant. And Monte Cristo was actually a considerate lover to her and looks after her. He has the relationship is a big daddy relationship. It's a very twisted relationship. We are not going to apologize for it. But here again, Dumas refuses to bend to Christian or any other Western conceptions of morality at the time. He refuses to bend to it. This causes endless problems to his adapters. In the 1964 British version, the television series, and again, more spoiler alerts here, the problem is faced head on. Heidi is obviously a young woman of at least 17 or 18 when we see her as the mistress of the Count of Monte Cristo. And she is presented this way by Dumas. They aren't even prettying up the text. She is already a young woman who knows the ways of the world all too well when he buys her from the Sultan. And she is forever grateful to him for that. But she's still very much his mistress. Everybody knows it. He clearly sleeps with her. He owns her. He actually sets her free, which is something, of course, a real Count of Monte Cristo, a Jeffrey Epstein, would never do. But here Dumas is not being a hypocrite. If you know the kind of man Dumas was, Dumas, as I said, contains many hypocrisies and contradictions in himself, and this is one of them. This is the way he wrote it. But it's still much too strong for modern adaptations. So what do we find in the wonderful Jim Caviezel version of 2002? Or the extremely good, but again, takes more liberties than a purist like me would like with the text, which is the 2024 television version, which was made by the French and the Italians with a wonderful British actor called Sam Klefeld playing the Count. And Klefeld is wonderful in the role. As far as I'm concerned, he can't surpass Bedell. Bedell is just perfect. And Caviezel is superb too. But Caviezel and if Bedell had never existed, Caviezel and Klefeld would be some of the best Monte Cristos for all time you could ever possibly imagine. But in both those versions, the ending is more than tweaked; it's completely changed. And we will go to this before I turn back and do the second part over the next 20 minutes of the man, what kind of man was capable of writing stuff so brilliant, so outrageous, so monstrous, so horrifying, and yet so unrelentingly honest and accurate at the same time. In the television version of 2024, and in the movie version of around 2002 or 2012, whenever it was, at the end of the novel, another spoiler alert coming up if anyone needs to go off, Monte commits suicide in despair and terror and fear. Largely out of fear because, again, he found he's full of hatred for the Count. I knew when we met. I could not explain it to myself, but I knew we were going to be the most deepest of enemies. And yet I never knew you and you never knew me. So why did you destroy me? Oh, no, says Monte Cristo. We knew each other. We know each other already. All too well. Look closely at me, Sieff. Look closely at me through the eyes of Fernand, the fisherman who betrayed his best friend all those years ago. And who do you see? My God, it is you. It is Dante. It is Edmond Dante. I am undone. Pulls out gun right after Dante leaves, and his own wife and own son have left him too. Bang. End of story, right? Tremendously powerful. But in the original novel, what happens to Monte Cristo at the end? Does he ever go back to Mercedes? Of course not. He is about to either commit suicide or go off as a lonely wanderer, more likely, to wander the world as he has done before in his identity of Sinbad the sailor. It's really a pagan slash semi-Christian version of the Wandering Jew. Monte Cristo has put himself beyond the Christian tradition. He has put himself beyond Christian salvation. He has been a force for God and a force for justice, but he is like John Wayne at the end of The Searchers. He has done such monstrous things in the name of justice, he can never return to human society, and he believes this way. Edmond Dante, that loving, gallant, sweet, admirable, heroic young sailor, was betrayed and died an agonizing, shattering death during the 14 years he still breathed in the Chateau d'If before he was miraculously escaped. The Count of Monte Cristo is often described as a vampire. He's pale. He has his emotions fully under control. He eats almost nothing in the company of other human beings, largely because he doesn't want to be tainted by their company or by their petty concerns. He has a philosophy that is beyond Christianity, beyond Islam, beyond Judaism, beyond any conception of good and evil. I have studied all the philosophies of the world, and I far prefer the Eastern ones because none of them are burdened down by your tiresome Western conceptions of virtue. I paraphrase slightly here, but it's all there. It's in Dumas, who had traveled almost as widely as Monte Cristo had himself by that point. It's all there. But what happens at the end? Life pulls a curveball on the arch manipulator himself. Heidi has fallen in love with him. You must never leave me, my lord, for my whole life is wrapped up in yours. It is you who saved me from the monstrous depredations of the Sultan and his coarse and horrific torturing guards, from the endless nightmares of Constantinople. It is you who gave me a life of dignity. It is you who loved me and cared for me and gave me everything I could possibly want. It is you who proved to be so noble beyond all human conception. It is you who brought justice and destruction on the murderer of my father. And if you were to release me to what you call freedom, my lord, I will kill myself immediately and I will die. So Monte Cristo in the original novel and in the 1964 British version, to its great credit, doesn't look a gift horse in the mouth. Here is this beautiful, incredibly beautiful young girl, wise in the technical ways of lovemaking, taught by the greatest harem experts in the world in Constantinople. And she wants to stay with him. He has freed her, so now he will marry her. He has the chance of children of his own. He has a soulmate who has been through as much a twisted life of horror and miraculous emergence from that horror as he has himself. He has actually found his soulmate in the most unexpected circumstances he could possibly have imagined and did not imagine. And this is a perfect ending. And it's Dumas' ending. But of course, for modern endings, you can't have it. You can't have the hero going off, marrying the woman who was a slave, even though in the modern versions she is only his ward. Did I not look after you as affectionately as a daughter? You are free now. Go on. All trait of Jeffrey Epsteinism is purged from the modern version, which is of course why Epstein and the people like him could get away with it for so long. Because in a society where the horrific things can be seen to their face and recognized for what they are, you can identify them and you can out the perverts, you can out the torturers, you can out and expose to the world the pedophiles. But in a world where people are really all pure, this is where the great gap that Freud explains to us between superego and id comes into play. The higher and more high-minded the conscious, like the English and American liberal conscience of the past 150 years, the more there will be widespread child prostitution and murder of babies and children going on at the other end of the table. And who are more high-minded than the Nazi and communist philosophers of the 1940s and 50s who claimed in both their own ways they only had to kill and torture because they were bringing eternal happiness for all mankind forever afterwards. The higher the ideals in the wrong way, the more you have to run for your life, which is another reason why I appreciate you folks so much for seeking stability and decency and protection in the realistic confines of the nation state that is exposed to full open accountability. It's not perfect, it will never be perfect, but it's infinitely better than anything else we have tried, or infinitely better than the horrific utopias which are being falsely opposed on us in the name of the highest ideals now. And Dumas realizes this. He realizes all of this. But this is not what the modern versions do. What do the modern versions do? At the very end, the beautiful Mercedes, and she is, of course, both in the wonderful Jim Caviezel movie and the Sam Clefeld movie. And Clefeld, again, is a wonderful count, though there are subtleties we'll go into briefly on that too before shifting to Dumas. At the end of both those versions, there is a happy ever after ending, but it's a different one. The happy ever after ending is that the Count sets Heidi free to live her own life, free life. And he gets back together again with Mercedes. In fact, in the 2001-2002 version, there's even a twist which is nowhere in Dumas. And actually, I loved because it gives another nice twist to it, but it's not what Dumas wrote. The two twists in the 2002, I think, the Jim Caviezel version certainly, are first after the contemptible Fernand Mondego, Comte de Morcerf, blows his own brains out in contemptible cowardness and fear. First of all, sure enough, Mercedes goes back to Edmond Dante, the Count himself, his first true love, and they walk up to the sunset hand in hand, lived happily ever after. And that's in the new version with Sam Cleland as well, and it's done beautifully well. But that's their version. But there's another twist in the 2001 one. They play with Dumas' dates a little bit. Dumas' chronology makes very clear that there is no way that Albert, the son of the Count de Morcerf and also the son of Mercedes, can possibly be Dumas' son. He didn't knock up Mercedes before they were about to get married. Albert is too young for that. He is only conceived a couple of years later. He cannot be Edmond Dante's son. He cannot be the Count of Monte Cristo's son. But in the 2002 version, he is revealed at the end by Mercedes to have been Edmund's son all along. And dramatically, it works beautifully. It's an absolute knockout. Wham, right between the eyes, guys, right? My reaction was the same as you were just saying there, Matt. Wow, I didn't see that one coming, guys. But having said that, it's a lovely ending, beautiful ending. But A, it is not what Dumas wrote, and B, well into my 8th decade of life now, it is not the way the world not only is, but the way the world ought to be. Because what's the difference between the two? It's a huge psychological difference and spiritual difference. When Monte Cristo goes off with Heidi, 25 years younger than he is, though she is, well, she'd be already a free woman. That's her choice. And she wasn't an innocent before he even bought her in the harem. He didn't corrupt her. She was already corrupted. He rescued her from corruption. You could say that even while she was a slave. But she's entirely intelligent and educated and smart and brave. She, as my wife is fond of saying, when any of our adult kids drive us absolutely crazy with their own principles or politics or just doing something we regard as absolutely inconceivable. And Debbie says to me, well, you haven't done anything about it, Marty. She's a big girl now, or he's a big boy now. And she's right. Adults are adults. Heidi is making her own choice. But Monte Cristo is making a choice too. He is putting the past behind him at last and discovering to his own amazement a woman is capable of loving him, a young and beautiful woman at that, and he, to his own even greater amazement, is capable of loving her and finding happiness with her. And Dumas makes this explicit. By contrast, what do we see in the cleaned up versions where the happy ending is Mercedes and Edmond get together at the end after all? What we see is Edmond and Mercedes are both looking back to the past. And actually, the answer to this is written in a beautiful piece of script writing, which I don't even think is in the novel, though it might be, but which jumped out at me just a couple of weeks ago when I was watching the wonderful Franco-Italian version, in which the wonderful Sam Clelov says to the beautiful Mercedes, Mercedes knows he's Edmund. She's the only one who has pierced his secret. And she is terrified of him because it is very clear to her alone that he is back for justice and back for vengeance. And not only is her husband firmly in the cross sights, but her innocent son is in the cross, and he is innocent, and he is admirable, is in the cross sights too. Edmond, Edmond, have pity, spare my son. But at another point, she says to him, because she is still in love with Edmond after all those years. She tried to help his father when the father was starving to death and dying of despair. She did everything she could for the father. She never lost the memory of Edmond. She tried to be true to him, but she was convinced he was dead, and everyone was telling her this. And the French state, of course, had betrayed both of them too and was telling her this. So what does she say to Edmond? She wants to create the young, sweet children dancing innocently in the street that they both truly once were. Can one not regain the past? Edmond. It's a plea which could come out of Plato, or one of the great tragic poets who was inspired by Plato. But it's not the answer that Dumas, who, remember, is many things and contradictions in himself at the same time, has the Count of Monte Cristo give. Dumas' character, the Count, as played by Clefeld, replies with a touch of sensitivity, and he perfectly understands and he feels this. But he also has his cold, brilliant, implacable clarity of the way the world really is and can only be. No, he says, what is done is done. What is past is past. The best thing we can do when it gives us suffering is to put it behind us and move on to the future. And the irony is, at the end of that version, the character and the writers contradict that emotion and make a happy ending by turning the clock back after all. But there may well be cases in life where such things happen. And I think there are, and I've known one or two of them. But I find it far more common and often that it is much better to recognize that you can try and apologize or make what limited amends you can for what you have screwed up in the past. But ultimately, you and other people, we are individual moral characters, and the arrow of time points in one direction, unless you're looking at pseudo-mystical science fiction. And therefore, that is as it should be. Finally, a postscript. The man himself. Who was capable of producing so many contradictions, of being such a contradiction to himself? A quote I've cited here often. Once in the presentation I had the privilege to give to you, Matt, and to all of you on General Grant, was the greatest friend Grant and the wisest friend Grant ever had in his life was General William Tecumseh Sherman. And Sherman said of Grant after he became president, and he had disappointed Sherman, not in the principles of his policies, but in some personal administration decision that Sherman felt betrayed by, though he understood why Grant had made them. He said, Grant is, after all these decades of friendship, Grant is still a mystery to me. I do believe Grant is a mystery to himself. And this is Dumas. And ultimately, it is his greatest creation too, because at the end of the Count of Monte Cristo, as it is written, the Count is a mystery to himself. He actually shows mercy to the worst of his enemies, Danglars. The others acted, however monstrously they acted for human motivations. Villefort acted to protect his family. Again, so common for virtually everyone in post-revolutionary France. Everyone had secrets. Everyone had done U-turns. Everyone had lied. Everyone had sold out. Everyone had made compromises, not just once, as to the Nazis, for example, but again and again and again, repeatedly and in different directions, so you didn't know where you stood. Society was still a human spinning gyroscope in the time of the Count of Monte Cristo, and nobody knew where it would finally come down. There was that. And Dumas recognizes this. But Dumas himself, His own father died when he was 4 years old. He is black. He is half black. And he is open about this, but in ways which still astonish us, stable in his openness and his unself-consciousness and his racism of it. But then the French were never remotely as self-conscious hypocrites or as monstrously racist as the English always were overseas in their empires. What does Dumas say about his historical background? My father was a mulatto, which meant a despised person of mixed black-white race. My grandfather was a Negro from Haiti. My great-grandfather was a monkey. This is Dumas père talking, the great Alexandre Dumas, the man who wrote The Three Musketeers, the great chronicler of glorious France, talking about himself. Talking about himself. Is that not wild? Is that not wild? What kind of life did he live? Well, again, we have more surprises. Very quickly.
Did you want me to show any pictures at all, Marty?
Yes, show it now. That's perfect. Bless you. Perfect, Matt. I'd forgotten totally. We're about to see the man himself. And the sight of him is revealing.
All right, so here it is. Here is Dumas and what looks to be his grandfather. I don't see his father, though. I couldn't find Dumas Sr., unfortunately.
No, Dumas Sr., he is Dumas Sr. There is a Dumas Jr. who is the son of our Alexandre Dumas. We will get to him. But if you keep the picture one just for a moment, Matt, I want to point out several things about him.
Which one? This one?
First of all, look at the guy on horseback. You can see him down here on the rearing horse. Exactly. That's the dad. Not the grandfather. That's the dad. The son of a freed slave or an escaped slave. Is that not a formidable man? This was a man who, from a black background, became a general of the French Revolution and at the age of 34 defeated the armies of Austria and opened the way to Italy and was one of Napoleon's most revered friends and lieutenants who Napoleon always spoke the world of. And that's the father. Is that not a formidable figure? And he serves Napoleon.
He was from Haiti, you said, right?
Yes.
Interesting.
The father is from Haiti. I think the son actually came from Haiti, but the family was from Haiti. Exactly. All the details are open either in Wikipedia. It's just I've forgotten reading them again, even when I refreshed my mind this morning. Second, look at our Dumas père, the big guy with the mustache, the fat guy. This is interesting too. What do you see there? Do you see a starving revolutionary writer? Do you see George Orwell starving himself to death because of principle, because he will not bow to the forces of capitalism or bow to the greatness of the British Empire or tell lies? This is a man of extraordinary realism and truth and accuracy. This one, but it's a man who's lived, and more importantly, a man who likes to live. He was married several times. He is estimated to have 40 serious mistresses, not 40 one-night stands, 40 long-term mistresses. He still managed to live to 68 before dying of a heart attack. He ate immensely well. He was a warm-hearted, kind, and generous man. He made millions of livres of money, but he spent all of them. And he spent most of them on generosity and kindness to his friends. This is crucial. This is exactly what the Count of Monte Cristo would have done. He isn't a cold, ruthless killer like the Count of Monte Cristo. He isn't a cold manipulator. But boy, can he tell a story, and boy, does he get well paid for it. He does not publish the Count of Monte Cristo as a work of timeless literature. He publishes it to make money in the Journal des Débats, one of the most influential French literary popular magazines read by scores of thousands of people in every issue over a 3-year period from 1844 to 1846. His creditors were after him as usual. He loved to gamble and drink too. He needed the money. He was a professional writer. He was the outstanding professional writer of his time. The model he had to work from to inspire him to make a fortune from writing was the English model, the great Charles Dickens, who also wrote in serial form. And his two great Russian successors who learned so much more from him are Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, both of who wrote their masterpieces for the same literary magazine in St. Petersburg. Perhaps somebody could look it up. I've forgotten the name of course, as always. But can you imagine that? Can you imagine spending 2 or 3 years as a young Russian idealist, or even a conservative, or what have you, but just as a young Russian boy or teenager, or in your 20s, in Petersburg, waiting at the newsstand, which is the only place you could get it, to buy the latest issue of a magazine, and in every month's issue, there would be another episode of Crime and Punishment and War and Peace at the same time, and you would always be on tenterhooks what to read next. And this is how The Count of Monte Cristo was written too. This is how The Count of Monte Cristo was written. But there is more. The Count of Monte Cristo is obsessed with 2 great themes, and we end with these, because they both reflect the extraordinarily topicality of Dumas, and why English high-minded literary intellectuals and scholars and the kind of fools well, I don't want to get away from Jane Austen, because Jane Austen is very high-minded and hypocrite, but Jane Austen lives deliberately in a sheltered world. Her brothers were captains and even admirals in the British Royal Navy. They had seen men with their arms blown off and their limbs blown apart. They had robbed ports and had them sacked and seen the women raped in order that they could bring home the wealth to build the fine country houses in which Jane Austen and her genteel friends took for granted. Jane was phenomenally intelligent. She could, of course, have seen and understood all of this stuff. She chose not to see it. She chose not to see it. But in Dumas, it's all there. And the history of the times is there. And the great innovation that Tolstoy carries out massively, ponderously, really belongs to Dumas, of integrating history into literature, into integrating his characters and the lessons that are learned from the characters into what is happening. It already started with Stendhal's The Red and the Black, and his account of the Battle of Waterloo. It's already there in French literature before Dumas. But Dumas does it on a scale and a thoroughness that has never been done before. And it's breathtaking. You can understand what happened in France in 1815, and there is no overt criticism of the governments. He doesn't dare to do that to anyone afterwards. And as far as the church, no, Dumas is more complex about the church than that. He's much more complex, and again, realistic. Because Dumas, to Dumas, the church is part of the world and is very worldly. And this is openly expressed. Monte Cristo openly boasts that he has bought the island of Monte Cristo from the Tuscan government, but his title of count comes from the Pope. And I think, and certainly he wins the freedom of one of Luigi Vampire's terrorists by giving the Pope an enormous jewel. Now, popes in our time are not supposed to be swayed by material things, but until 1870, the Pope was a secular prince as well as being a monarch. He ran the Papal States, he ran all of central Italy, he controlled them. And to Dumas, this is a perfectly natural way that the popes have been, at least, since the time of the Middle Ages, at the very least, if not earlier. He doesn't disapprove of this. He doesn't approve of it either. It simply is. I mentioned before that one of the Count of Monte Cristo's key secret identities, because like all good superheroes, he has secret identities, right? And he has many. And one of the 2 top ones is, as I said, the English aristocrat, Lord Wilmore, who's he allows to be almost as fantastically wealthy as Monte Cristo himself. And of course, he has a nice touch. Wilmore is jealous of Monte Cristo, because Monte Cristo is even wealthier than he is. And if you are an English billionaire in the 19th century, nobody should be more wealthy than you are, right? Nobody, right? But who is his second favorite secret identity? It is a priest, the Abbe Busoni, an Italian priest who goes around doing good, hearing deathbed confessions, connecting people who need to be connected, giving wisdom, largely doing what a priest does. And again, as is typical with Dumas, he has his cake and eats it. Because on the one hand, the Abbe Busoni is doing exactly what a priest ought to do. But on the other hand, it's the arch cynic and non-Christian believer, even though he believes in God, the Count of Monte Cristo, who is doing what Christian priests are clearly failing to do in these situations. Giving food and psalms and even wealth to people who deserve it or desperately need it, and hearing their deathbed confessions and reconciling them with God. So Dumas, again, is typical of his time. He is on the fence. He is on both sides at different times. And this is essential to both understanding Dumas and appreciating him, because Dumas is filled with contradictions, and we should not try to resolve them. Why should we not try to resolve them? Because it is the human condition. We all have those contradictions in ourselves. Thank you very much. Formal presentation ends. If we have time, open to questions. Oh, Jenny, dear, bless you. If only we could have a few drinks together. And you know the kind of whiskeys I go for.
All right, we have to put that on the to-do list as far as actually getting together for a proper Marty experience. Oh, there's something weird going on there in the background. All right. I'm just gonna put somebody on mute if I can. There we go. Done. Magic. Okay. So there are a couple of interesting thoughts, observations, questions from the audience. I'm gonna call first upon Peter, who has some really nice ideas and questions. So Peter, throw out whatever you want.
Oh, thanks. Well, the first one I'm going to set aside. I was just joking because Martin started riffing about films, and I was making some remarks about the War and Peace version with Henry Fonda as.
Bondarchuk's version is great.
Of course. So I read the Three Musketeers in sixth grade, and I read the Count of Monte Cristo in junior high. So I had a question. When trying to cover both of them, does Dumas show his opinion of the church in his portrayal of Richelieu as a villain, and as I think the first éminence grise I ever came across in literature?
He's being typically French. He isn't calling for a Protestant Reformation or revolution at any point. It is simply natural for him that a prince of the church will also be a prince of the state. It's just natural for him. It's a contradiction that doesn't bother him. He lives with it. And the other thing is, you touch another key point here, and that is in the Three Musketeers, Richelieu, as you say, is completely the deep-dyed villain. But there are 3 more major volumes in the series, and they're enormous too. And we trace the entire life of D'Artagnan all the way through. You wouldn't want to be D'Artagnan. He's the greatest military hero in France, but he loses, like Monsieur le Comte de Monte Cristo, he loses the true love of his life. Tragically, she's poisoned by Madame in the first book. And as another of the Musketeers says, there is no antidote for any poison. She prescribes. I think in the 1943 version, the evil My Lady is played by, of all people, Angela Lansbury from Murder, She Wrote, who was wonderful as villain. She's also the greatest villainess of all time on celluloid in the Manchurian Candidate. I mean, a wonderful lady, wonderful lady. But my lady poisons D'Artagnan's girlfriend. Sorry, I'm freely spinning off in wild tangents again. My apologies, Peter. But there's a change in the attitude towards Richelieu. As you say, in the Three Musketeers, Richelieu is Doctor Doom. He's the darkest of villains. He's what's his name from? He's Darth. He's Darth Vader from Star Wars, right? But by the time we get to Cardinal Mazarin in 20 years later, Richelieu's not so bad, because Richelieu kept the French state powerful and ruthless and strong, which, again, the philosopher king of his time, Dumas, ultimately really wants. Remember, he's the son of Napoleon's general, and that is the key to Dumas' politics, ultimately. However much he thinks he's a liberal revolutionary, he's lying to himself. He's really a Bonapartist at heart. He's really once a Plato's philosopher king at heart, and he has a conception of human nature that is unchanging. When you're good, and you can be raised up, but only through suffering to get even better. But when you're bad, many opportunities to repent are offered to you, But in the novels, none are taken. And that's another huge change you see in the generally wonderful TV version that's just come out with Sam, because Caderousse is first played by as a black man, and being black, though, he's going to be a good guy, right? According to modern sensibilities, there is only one black character in the Count of Monte Cristo, and he's actually a very good guy, but he can't speak. He's a deaf mute, Ali, who is devotedly loyal, is good and loyal to the Count, because after the big bad Muslim Nazi slash communist slash Russian slash Chinese arch villain in Constantinople, cut his throat cords, Monte Cristo saved his life, but he can't speak. So he's noble, but he's just there, right? But there are no real priests there at all. The only one you really see is there are two, and the other one is actually a father figure to I nearly forgot him, and he's crucial. He's the Abbé Faria. He's the man who breaks from the next door cell in the Chateau d'If. He thinks he's breaking to freedom, and he's only breaking into the next door cell where Dantes is. But his friendship, first of all, saves Dante from despair. And the Abbé Faria is a genius. He's, if you can imagine, he's been jailed for a liberal cause, because he's inspired Garibaldi. He wants the liberal freedom of Italy as a liberal republic, loyal or allied to England. And because this is what Dumas wants. And this is presented as admirable and glorious. And it's presented by a priest. But again, priests, good or bad, in Dumas, are princes of the world as well as princes of people. But in 20 years after the second of the D'Artagnan cycle of 4 novels, you find already looking back from 20 years later, it's a time of the flaunt. It's a time of civil war in France and chaos. Cardinal Mazarin is the lover of the Queen, and Dumas despises Mazarin as a weakling. And at one point, Dumas even asks, why is it that our beautiful Queen Anne has made a lover? Well, remember, he's writing in France in the 19th century under a kingdom, and he doesn't care that he's talking about the Queen of France having a fling with the Cardinal Archbishop of Paris, or the leading cardinal of the nation, the head of the Catholic Church in France. This is irrelevant to him. He doesn't mind. He isn't shocked by it. He isn't waving the finger at it, and he isn't approving of it either. He just says it is. But he makes a different value judgment. Richelieu was strong and decisive and kept France at peace and prosperous and strong. And she spurned him as a lover. And instead she takes as a lover this contemptible wretch, Mazarin, instead. That's the only question Dumas asks about the relationship between Mazarin and the Queen of France in 20 years afterwards. But the nature of the church, to him, the church is there. It is a power. It is often contemptible. It is often irrelevant. It sometimes is a true force for good. It's best when you take it at face value and ignore the hypocrisies and try and help it feed the poor. But you can't expect too much from it. But it's there. That's the real life Dumas attitude towards the church in his time.
Thank you, Marty. All right. So Richard has an idea that I'd like Richard to share, and I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this as well. Richard?
Hi, Matt. Thanks. It's just a brief thought. I'd like to say that the Haitian slave revolt paralleled the French Revolution, and
Yes.
that may be the means by which Dumas' father and then Dumas could enter French society.
Oh, yes.
You know, it was the first challenge to colonialism from the Third World. Anyways, it's great summary, and it's been so long ago since I encountered Dumas when I was grade 6, 7, and so I can barely remember it. Although I did introduce my kids when they were very young to Count of Monte Cristo. I thought it was very important. for them. But anyways, as soon as you gave your summary and mentioned the protagonist's name, which I had forgotten years ago, Edmund Dante, and it struck me that there's definite parallels in your summary between Dante's Divina Commedia and the Count of Monte Cristo. There seems to be from through the inferno of the flatterers and betrayers and nihilists to some kind of higher state. So I just it's just a thought that came to me as soon as you mentioned the protagonist's name, Edmund Dante. It just struck me. So, I'd like your comments on that.
You blow me away, man. I mean, that's just wonderful. It's I haven't looked at. There may be a million books written on this, but it never ever occurred to me, and it should be so obvious. And it's always the obvious we always miss. I think that's brilliant. I think that's outstanding because he does present Paris as he's writing at the same time as Thackeray is writing Vanity Fair in Britain. But Vanity Fair is simply a stinging and admirable and wise satire. And so is Trollope's wonderful The Way We Live Now, which in some respects has striking parallels to this. In both cases, the hero / villain, although they come to different ends, are outsiders in society, are charismatic figures from mystery, a mystery background. There's strong parallels to be made. And incidentally, there are all, with the endless riches of YouTube, there is a wonderful, again, British television adaptation of Trollope's The Way We Live Now, in which Poirot himself, the wonderful Sir David Suchet, plays the mysterious Jewish, wealthy, cynical financier in Trollope's masterpiece. And what people always miss, by the way, in Trollope's masterpiece is that the hero is Jewish as well as the villain. Because the gallant, noble, upright, heroic young engineer, Montague, who builds the railroad in America from Canada to Mexico, makes it happen. Every reader of one of the most famous and wealthiest, most respected names in Britain, the two most famous Jewish families to be ennobled and rise in England in the 19th century, of course, the Rothschilds, but also the Montagues. And all the Montagues were Jewish. Most of them still are. The name is still a byword for eminent people in the English Jewish community, which English Jews, being as snobbish as all other English people are, take with great importance. And the only opposition to the Balfour Declaration being accepted by the British government in 1917 was by the only British member of the War Cabinet at the time, Edwin Montagu, who came from the same family. So when Trollope calls his hero not only is his villain Jewish, though the villain is presented in psychological complexity and sympathy, a great deal of sympathy and sensitivity and understanding, and the daughter too, but the hero of the novel, the moral counterpoint in the novel, is a Montague. And he doesn't have to say a word afterwards. The point is completely missed by all 20th century readers in Britain and America because they've forgotten the history and don't care about it. But to every reader of Trollope up to World War I and thereafter, the point was obvious and inescapable to them. But there's one more point to add, and that is, and again, you bring up an absolutely fascinating point here, and that again is back with, please just recount again and get me. You have a young man's memory. I do not, Richard. The very point.
I'm not that young. I'm almost as old as you.
That's terrifying. I was hoping you were 10 years older. You had something more to look forward to.
I'm 72.
Oh my God, you are a youngster. Well, in that case, you have a better memory and you don't have to apologize for it. What can I say? What can I say? But, your first point, please repeat again about Dumas, because there was something else that struck me from it, and I don't want to keep forgetting it.
What's that?
Your first question. What was your first question again about Dumas?
The parallels, the intentional parallels to Dante's Divina Commedia.
Yes, no. I fully agree with that. But there was something else you said that set me off, And if it comes to you, tell me. And if it comes to me, I will do it too. Because the key point, well, there are many key points here, of course. Now, let's go on. Oh, yes. Duma, you were asking about Duma's position, not on the church, but on some other, on a more, oh, yes, colonialism. Crucially important point.
Yeah.
Because again, as I said, he's a contradiction unto himself. He is the result of the great colonial revolt against France in Haiti.
Yeah.
And he makes no secret of his background. None whatsoever. He is proud of it in his own way. Very proud. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yet, in the Count of Monte Cristo, colonialism, French colonialism, is presented as admirable in the greatest possible way. Because one of the most heroic, admirable characters in the book of The Hope of the Next Generation, Maximilien Morel, the gallant young soldier who has no money to his name, but has become a friend of Albert de Morcerf, the son of Mercedes, while they were serving in Algeria, right? And he introduces Albert introduces Captain Morel to polite society in Paris. Now, Morel's family is modestly prosperous in Marseille. They are ship owners, they are traders, but they were going bankrupt until the mysterious Count of Monte Cristo. They don't even know it was him until a mysterious angel working through, of course, the English banking house of Thomson and French miraculously restores their fortunes on the 5th of September, a day, and as Maximilian and his sister Julie say to the Count, not knowing, of course, that he is the benefactor. And of course, like Shakespeare, Dumas is a past master at setting up these apparently ridiculous but dramatically stunning ironies. You know, I know you, I love you, but I don't know who you are, whereas I know you, and I know you don't know me. That kind of, you know, 2 or 3 body problem, that kind of thing. Oh, monsieur, if only you knew. But young Morel, the young officer, impresses Monte Cristo when no one else does. And how does he do so? Monte Cristo says to him, why, I see, Monsieur Morel, that you have already won the highest decorations, Prix le Mérite. You are legendaire. You are already a hero of France. And you are back from your great service to the nation in Algeria, civilizing those who need to be civilized. Now, of course, the French occupation of Algeria was colonialist. It was not neo-colonialist. It was paleo-colonialist. It was totally unapologetic. You killed all the Arabs that you could, and you took their land, and you gave them to French settlers, and you enslaved the handful who were left. And although Dumas is the son of a revolutionary hero who himself was black, who was only lived a life of freedom and dignity and survival because of the French Revolution in Haiti, he has become more French than the French, and it doesn't bother him.
Yeah. Well, it's the slave revolt allowed Napoleon to incorporate a black general into his
yes,
military
while
campaign.
killing most of the black revolters, which he also did. Exactly.
Which he also did. Yes, contradiction. Yes.
On this note, Jerry actually is. I'm really happy that he has a question both on the topic of revenge and the transmogrification of revenge, which I think also takes place by the end of Monte Cristo. Adding to your observation, Richard, of this journey from hell to paradise idea that I think has a lot of value. But Jerry's also done work on Haiti and has given a few really great classes and essays. So, Jerry, what do you think about what's being said here about Napoleon, Haiti, some of the nuance there, and your question on revenge?
Well, the interesting thing on Haiti, because I did a lot of work on Toussaint Louverture, is that the revolutionaries in Haiti were always pro-French. They loved France because France was the only country on earth which had made slavery illegal because of their Declaration of the Rights of Man. And it was Napoleon who then, with this SOB Talleyrand, who restored slavery in Haiti, and that's when the Haitians went against France. So it's an interesting, and the fact that Dumas' father could become a general under Napoleon, it's very strange, but it happens. It's a real nuance. But I could give a whole class on that, but I'll stop there. But I have a question for you, Marty, because
Go ahead, Jerry.
I read the Count of Monte Cristo so long ago when I was young. And I did see a movie on it. It must have been the BBC version because it was a long time ago too. And there's the theme of revenge, after Dante escapes. And, when you're young and you're reading it, you not only sympathize with him, you're almost in favor of his revenge for what they did to him. And I can remember the ending of the story, when he says the past is the past, leave it behind. For me, this was just my own interpretation of it. I thought he was saying not just leave the past behind, but I have to leave this idea of revenge behind too, if I'm going to go forward. Now, I don't know if Dumas had that in mind. That was my own interpretation, but I just wanted to hear your comments about this theme of revenge through the whole book, Marty.
Oh, Jerry, again, thank God we are not Siamese twins in bodies, but we do seem to be the way our minds work and what we're both passionately into and how we set each other up and things. What can I add? You 100% agree with you. You've nailed it. Absolutely. And a couple of further points. First, Dumas is completely explicit about this. And this is another interesting difference slightly with the more modern versions. The modern versions also have, quite correctly, in the best of them, all the ones I cited, have the Count of Monte Cristo moving on from revenge, even becoming sickened by it. And there is a specific event at the almost the end, which is the point which turns him, which is when a wicked and contemptible boy, but still only an 8-year-old boy, is poisoned by his mother when she commits suicide as well, from poisonings for cold murder she has actually taken place. But she kills her own son too. And again, this is an example of Dumas looking at life as it is. And this is the turning point for the Count. This is the point when he says, I've gone too far. And the irony is it leads to an ending that I don't like in the traditional book, but that all three of the television and movie versions I've cited for you adapt, I think, as an improvement on Dumas. So everybody is always improving Dumas. Had Dumas lived, he would have tinkered with it and changed it himself in a way that you cannot be a Dumas fundamentalist. Because again, but bless you for bringing it up, because it also brings up a point I would have missed otherwise, which is crucially important. And that is answering Peter's point again on the Jewish concept teshuvah. He asked, are there Jewish or Christian concepts of repentance in literature? Well, first of all, yes, endless ones. And in Western literature, the Christian ones you find everywhere from everyone, and they're all over the place, and they're very rich and deep and meaningful. And you find that it's the essence of Crime and Punishment with Dostoevsky. It's a huge, crucial theme in Solzhenitsyn's first two masterpieces, Cancer Ward and The First Circle. People being brought to see the monstrous things that they did, or the idealistic things that they thought they were doing that actually had monstrous results, and people being capable of repenting from it, and others who are lost, who are not capable of repenting from it. This is a huge Christian theme. But in modern Jewish literature, of course, it's there too, except, of course, it has a different label. It goes by a different name. It's called psychoanalysis. Instead of confessing to the priest, you confess to your therapist, and the therapist must unravel the mystery. And a lot of the most lurid and ridiculous Hitchcock plots and semi-Hitchcock plots of the 1940s, when Freud was still riding high before he went out of favor for both real reasons and false reasons, both, come basically from this, that the psychoanalysis, who is, if he's not Jewish, he'll be an Italian lady, right? And this is what you have in The Sopranos, right? I mean, there are priests in The Sopranos, but it's very much actually, now it occurs to me, exactly the way Dumas treats the priest. David Chiasi, of course, from Italian Catholic family background himself. That's his sense of the church. The church is there, and in principle, it's admirable. But the priest there actually makes a play at Tony's wife. The priest is a sleaze. Who is the true priest figure, the confessor figure, who brings the moral center to the Sopranos? It is Dr. Well, I forget her name, played by Lorraine Bracco, the great Italian. She isn't a Jewish psychiatrist, but she's an Italian lady psychiatrist. Again, you have a confessor, a moral center for the universe, but it's not an ordained priest. It's still somebody of Catholic background, but it's a lady, and she's a psychotherapist. This is the wondrous nature of America and of art, and how things change and transform even among them, even among themselves. But I think your point is just absolutely spot on. Totally agree with you. And I think it goes again very much with Richard's marvelous point about Paris being the seven circles of Dante's hell, and that's certainly the way that Monte Cristo experiences it. And I suppose you could even take it further and say Monte Cristo is an ambiguous character. Even when he is at his height, kind of Monte Cristo, he hasn't qualified for heaven. He has only qualified to travel freely through hell and experience what hell is all completely like, from the highest levels of Paris society to the lowest and most miserable and despairing levels of society. And yet at the end, through his repentance over causing the death of the boy Edward without meaning to, and also through the love of Haiti, he is morally and emotionally reborn. And it is a resurrection to a new life for him. And look, at the end of the Gospels, Jesus rises up to heaven. But before he rises up to heaven, he goes off to Galilee to meet with the disciples there. He's launching a new beginning in the world, on earth as in heaven. And this we see with Monte Cristo as well. The seven seas are his oyster, and he's got Heidi beside him. What more does he need?
I just wanted to add one more thing, Marty.
Please, yes.
I wanted to thank you for your work on Dostoevsky, because I can read Dostoevsky now. Many years ago, I only read one thing of Dostoevsky. It was a very, very small book. I think they took one chapter from Brothers Karamazov, and it was a little book called The Grand Inquisitor.
Yes,
I read that, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever read. And I said, if this is Dostoevsky, I'm afraid to read any more of them. But after your work on Dostoevsky, I'm not afraid to read him anymore, Marty.
You're braver than I am. A couple of treats for you. First, there is a version of The Idiot that seems so weird, but it's done by a genius. You have to watch. The glorious Japanese director, the great humanist Akira Kurosawa, did a movie of The Idiot.
Yeah.
Set in Japan after World War II. Duh. But of course, it's Kurosawa. You're dealing with a genius. It works. And secondly, for all you suckers for suffering out there, the version of Dostoevsky to read, which has all the jokes put in, which previous translators do not. I mean, I find Dostoevsky, my old teacher and mentor Isaiah Berlin revered Tolstoy, thought Tolstoy had angel's wings, and I despised Tolstoy. One point I actually didn't make here, and I'll take a note to make now, is how I think Dumas is so superior to Tolstoy in his conception of recreating the past and recreating history. Tolstoy has, first of all, this mechanistic past where individuals don't matter. Marxist communism and soulless socialism come straight out of Tolstoy. They really do. But even Napoleon is presented as a meaningless puppet. By contrast, look at the wonderful way Rod Steiger played Napoleon with a Russian director, even when the Soviet Union was in power. The movie of Waterloo is superb, and Steiger's portrayal is mesmerizing, because you think this is a repulsive, mad, ruthless shit.
Yeah.
But I can see why 10 million men marched after him. and followed everything he did.
Never
All
parallel
of that is in Steiger, right? But
Dante's divinity comedy.
in Tolstoy, you have all these huge, boring digressions in War and Peace about the inevitability of history and the greatness of Kutuzov was he did nothing. And exactly, you know this, it's farcical. It wasn't true. It was infantile shit. It was embarrassingly bad. By contrast, Dumas' treatment of the dynamics of history is mature and humble and humane and also much more Christian. Because Dumas, although he would like call himself a confessing Christian, I think, nevertheless recognizes God as in heaven. The justice of God and the role of God and the way God works through the hidden hands and desires of men and women that they do not even understand themselves permeates the Count of Monte Cristo, permeates it. And in the uncertainties of history as it is lived, Napoleon is gone forever. He is the jackal, the great devourer, the monster. No, the monster has landed again from Ebla. The general is on the march. The great emperor is back in the palace at Fontainebleau. Vive l'empereur. And then 100 days later, he's gone again. And the lives of hundreds of thousands of people are turned upside down and ruined for life by informers and deep states. There's none of this in Tolstoy. Solzhenitsyn understands it only too well, but there's none of this in Tolstoy. None of it. But it's all there. It's all there in Dumas. Dumas' understanding of the uncertainty of history, that we can look back on history, but we cannot look forward in history because we really don't know what's going to happen next. And that also, even when we look back, we are the products of chaos. We are the products of irony. We are the products of the human world turned upside down, not just once, but many times, which is why we crave desperately the blessings of order and the blessings of structure. And we need the right kind of principles as opposed to the wrong kind of principles. Because while I'm very attracted to the ways of Heraclitus, Heraclitus doesn't anchor us in everything. Heraclitus simply says everything changes and you got no control over it, and tomorrow is going to be different from yesterday. Well, duh. But how are you going to keep your sanity in such a world? How are you going to keep any kind of moral values or decency, or what you regard as kindness and decency and meaning in such a world? Do you have to redefine your concept of decency and value and fair play and honesty? And Dumas says, no, you don't. There is still a God. There are still absolute values. That even if the world is turned upside down, this is the way it has to be. You have to try and hold on as best you can in a world that you don't pretend to predict like Tolstoy did. And of course, he always got it wrong anyway. So I regard, and also all this is subtly and inferred in Dumas. It doesn't take up great chunks of ridiculous and embarrassing pseudo-philosophizing that are embarrassing to read, that you choke on. Which is the way Tolstoy does it. And of course, Dostoevsky has learned from Dumas. Dostoevsky's characters live out these principles and moral issues themselves. The Grand Inquisitor has chosen evil, and he's fine with it because unfortunately, he's a genius, and Dostoevsky recognizes genius can be evil, and it's still genius. But that doesn't mean you embrace it or you should approve of it. You may, God help you, need to be martyred by it. But it doesn't make it right. But like Dumas, he recognizes what is there. And one last point on this, and again, thank you for this, because this is a huge issue. And again, it shows how Dumas is so modern. Where did Dumas get his ideas from? He was a crime editor and crime publisher. Remember, there used to be True Detective magazines and pulp magazines, Grisly Murders I Have Known. And they still flourish today on the cable channels. How to Get Away with Murder, They Didn't Get Away, Monsters I Have Known, Recognize the Psychopath Among You. Every time I turn to cable television, I find the world frightening enough without watching that stuff. So actually, I don't, even coming from North, I mean, because I come from Northern Ireland, as I do. But, it's on every streaming channel, right? Well, who pioneered this? Dickens, to a large degree. He started out as a crime reporter. But so did Dumas. A decade before he wrote The Count of Monte Cristo, and he was already desperate for money because he loved to live the high life, and the high life was very expensive in Paris. and he was really a best-selling writer. So how did he make one of his first big financial and publishing coups? He wrote a book called basically Real Life Crimes and Conspiracies. It became 8 volumes of work. He had a whole research staff of dozens of writers researching this and writing it for him. He paid them very poor wages. Some of them took legal action against him afterwards because he was so desperate. He was a kind of generous man, but he was also desperate for money to pay his many debts. But he even pioneers popular crime reporting in the modern way. And it's from that background that he learns of the cases of murder and revenge that inspired him to write The Count of Monte Cristo. The crimes and the investigations of the crimes in The Count of Monte Cristo are realistic because they are based on he wasn't a theoretician writing for a quick buck out of the top of his head like Arthur Conan Doyle started out in Britain 60 years later. He has actually been a professional crime reporter and the most successful and prolific and wealthiest sensational crime reporter in France. Think of Paula Zahn, with her TV show, wives who murder their husbands. I'm always terrified. My wife will watch that too much, or will get too many creative ideas from it, But these shows, they still run ones that have been made 20 and 30 years ago. The public's appetite for this is insatiable. And it was the same 200 years ago. So again, Dumas is writing about modern America because that's exactly the way France was 180 years ago.
Marvelous, Marty. I got to get you to do a class down the line on Dostoevsky. That's something that I think I don't think we've ever really.
Now that's like climbing Mount Everest when you've only climbed the mountains of Mourne in Ireland before that. That's just cosmic. But then again, I can relate to old Fedya. I mean, there's the gambling, there's the booze, there's the stunning young wife he landed for himself, even when he was having apoplectic fits all the time. There was the paranoia that the liberals were out to get him when actually it was his own secret police. By all means, let's do one, Fedya.
All right, we'll keep it going. We'll keep the dialogue going, and I always love your presentation so much, Marty. This is really good. And the BBC 1964 broadcast that you had referenced is going to be plugged. It's already in the chat for those who are here live, but for those who are watching on YouTube, go to the description box, and you can find the entire playlist on YouTube for free. So you can check that out. I'm going to check that out tonight. Yes. And thank you all for joining us for today's mind-expanding journey through Marty Sieff's wonderful, wonderful wisdom and knowledge. And this is great. So next week, we're going to have, just to throw it out there, the class is going to be Nick Jones. Nick Jones is going to do something on Kwame Nkrumah's battle to revive a better African tradition. Sheikh Anta Diop, as well, is going to be somebody that Nick Jones is going to introduce as a scholar, somebody who understood some elements of deep history and modern living politics in the world that he lived in the 1950s, 60s, battling a bunch of sociopathic memory scrubbers of the European imperial faction, which is a real wonderful set of ideas that he's going to bring to the surface next Sunday, 2 p.m.
Thank you. If I may, I've just seen something Peter's just put up, which is also glorious, which would fit with you wonderfully on Dostoevsky. The TV version of The Brothers Karamazov, which was the least horrific of all Hollywood's attempts to mangle Dostoevsky, did have Yul Brynner, who was wonderful, Richard Basehart, very underestimated, Lee J. Cobb, who's an extraordinary talent, but most of all, who plays the sweet, innocent, virginal youngest son, Alyosha? This is what, 1959, 1961, somewhere like that. He's still with us today. He will always be with us. William Shatner. Now, who could make this up? Exactly.
Fascinating.
What can we do with that?
All right. Thank you, Peter. All right. Another one for the list. All right. Bye, everybody. Till next week.
Bye, Matt.
See ya.
Thank you.
See you later.
Bye, guys.